The Scrutineers. When the Scrutineers kicked off back in 2012, one of our first guests was Glenn Druery. He is known as the Preference Whisperer quite a lot, and he's an electoral strategist. He has played an integral role in working with minor parties to help them work out preference flows in order to get elected to the Australian Senate.
Now, after the last federal election, the Senate formed a committee to review those voting arrangements, and they've recommended major reforms that will change the way we vote and how our votes are counted.
And what kind of reforms are they proposing, Casey?
Well, the biggest two are to abolish group voting tickets. These are the things that give micro-parties a shot at election, really. They allow them to do deals and collect preferences from each other. It's the thing that allows someone with 0.5% of the vote to snowball and collect preferences until they reach a quota. The other change was to introduce optional preferences in the Senate so that you don't have to start numbering every single box below.
Yeah, so
line.
you can just vote for the 20 candidates out of the 90 on the ballot sheet that you actually like.
Or if you like, just the one candidate that you like, potentially. We spoke to Glenn Druery. We started by asking if these changes would result in the so-called micro-parties being wiped out altogether.
Look, it would. It would more or less, and it would be an attack on democracy if it was to happen. Not only would it severely impact the minor parties, in the longer term, it would severely impact the Greens as well. And I think we'd ultimately be looking at, in 2, 3, 4 electoral cycles, the coalition may well have the balance of power.
Is it not fair to say, as a lot of critics would, that the election of some senators at the last election did not really represent the actual will of the voters, that they were elected by such a small number?
Oh, look, I think that all forms of democracy are good, and the more, if you like, ordinary voices we have in the Senate is a very, very good thing. But let's not forget this figure, and I do bandy this around a lot, and I think it's very important, that 5 million Australians voted for parties other than the majors at the last federal election.
Yes, they might have voted but they didn't all vote for the same minor party, and that's the issue. It's this lottery of candidates that get up, and you can't really say that the will of the people's been represented if a random minor party candidate has been elected, not the one that actually people want.
Look, I don't think there was anything random about it at all. I was, as everyone knows, deeply involved in the outcome of many of the elections of some of the senators were put into Parliament. And another thing we shouldn't forget is that the system was put there by the major parties to keep ordinary people out. So just because ordinary Australians have figured out actually how to use the system, I really don't see that as a bad thing.
Moving on from that, though, if the changes are successful, what other tactics could small parties use to get elected? Do you think there'd be a scramble to find a new way to get through the preferences to try and overcome the system set up by the big parties, as you say?
Well, look, we have an optional preferential system in New South Wales, and it is possible for small parties to find their way through that, but the quota in New South Wales is considerably less than that in the Senate. In the Senate, it's just over 14%. New South Wales is about 4.5%. So it is much easier in New South Wales. If we talk in terms of if these changes are introduced in the Senate, it will be very, very difficult for ordinary Australians to get a Guernsey in the Senate. Very, very difficult. And what are we going to go back to there? Just party hacks, a caucus-grinding backbenchers who do what the whip says.
The Labor Senator Sam Dastyari has now said that it would be complete madness for the Labor Party to support these changes. He thinks it would result in a more conservative upper house. You've hinted at the same. Why is that? Look,
Sam Dastyari has come out, Penny Wong and Stephen Conroy and many others in the Labor Party, and said that these changes are not only anti-democratic, but they will be an attack on the balance. And that is that certainly initially minor parties will be all but wiped out. And over several electoral cycles, the Greens will have a real problem. In fact, if we had this system at the last election, South Australia would not have a Green elected. WA with Scott Ludlam, they should be okay, but on the off cycle, they will struggle. And I think the Greens will move back to possibly 4 senators. That will mean that the coalition in the longer run will have the balance of power. Now, work choices, do we want that election cycle after electoral cycle in infinitum? I don't think we do.
The Labor politicians supported the changes in the committee. Gary Gray still supports them. Why do you think there's now this split in their ranks, and why have some of them come to a different conclusion?
I think they've got their calculators out. It's as simple as that. Just after the election, I think there was a bit of a popularist move to say, oh, isn't this terrible? We've got ordinary folk entering the parliament. We have to stop them. And really, let's just take a step back. That's what this is about. They don't want the likes of you and me and the listeners entering the parliament. We've got to be party hacks. We've got to